Welcome to another episode of TEV. I'm glad that you're joining us today and you're tuning in. We have some interesting topics to talk about today. That me and Chris will be talking about today. Go ahead, talk your talk, Chris. Talk to the people.
Oh man, it's an exciting Easter day. First off, we want to tell everybody Happy Easter. We hope you enjoyed your celebration and spent time with your family. We're here tuning in from our Easter Sunday.
Yes, sir.
So just really appreciative. Glad that we're able to do this on this day. But we do have a word of the day, and that is auspicious.
Auspicious.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
We hope that you can take that word and run with it, learn from it, as we are doing.
Yes,
In real time.
we already know what that word means. We're
I
not
did
going to
not
go.
know what that word meant.
We're not going to go in any detail about that word.
No.
We have the definition for you.
If you don't know, look on the screen. If not, look it up.
Yeah, human walking dictionary right here.
Yeah. But anyways, let's go ahead and start rolling with our topics.
Yeah, what's the topic, Chris? What's the first order of business for today, man? What we got, bro?
Well, my good friend Calvin here would find it auspicious that Andrew Tate, the renowned misogynist, allegedly,
Okay.
he's been released in this past week from the Romanian prison that him and his brother Tristan Tate were in. And they'll be under house arrest until April 29th. And like I said, Calvin is I'll say a supporter of Mr. Tate and his shenanigans if you tuned into our last episode.
I respect Andrew Tate. I'll put it like that. I'm not like how people are for Donald Trump in a sense. In that regard, I don't put him as God. He has his flaws, but there's some things that are okay. I see your point. I understand your point very well. But yeah, man, it's getting to this thing. Enough of how I feel about Andrew Tate.
We're gonna dive into that a little bit.
We're gonna
later.
talk about it.
So Andrew Tate, we all know that he's quite the character when it comes to fighting the power, the matrix as he calls it. And he believes that this attempt to silence him is reached a new level. I believe on April 2nd, he came out on Twitter and made a post saying, and I quote, would you like to read that?
I'll try to give my best interpretation of Andrew Tate. Cobra Tate, according to his Twitter page. All right, so this is what Tate this is what he tweeted. I prepare my body to absorb the brutal kinetics of piercing lead. As all other silencing attempts fail and stage 3 approaches, I anticipate a bullet will be the chosen utensil of pacification. I can only pray and prepare. I will force myself to breathe the best I can. I promise. So those are the I can't even say the words, but that's how he chose to express himself via Twitter to the world after his release. And okay, I see what he's stated, and
If for all who I guess can't read between the lines, he's saying that he expects an attempt on his life to be made by the powers that be, as he believes to be had done with the imprisonment that him and his brother experienced. He expects as he says, a stage 3, I guess a third attempt to be taken on his life. This time with what he believes to be a bullet. Yeah.
Yeah, he's while he was in jail, he was saying that he was going to challenge himself to do push-ups to stay fit. So I'm guessing he's trying to prepare his chest for the root.
Yeah, I mean,
bounce those bullets off. I guess
the chest ain't that tight. The bullet might
get stuck.
Yeah, it might get stuck. The question I guess that we have to talk about is: has Andrew Tate accepted his role as a martyr for his toxic masculinity movement?
I'm not going to say that toxic masculinity doesn't exist. But I think from if I'm allowed to speak from Tate's point of view, I think he's just trying to uh, promote just masculinity, just the word masculinity. Now the toxic part, I think that came from just the world's view, other bystanders, um, other women that wanted to deem this as what he's preaching as toxic masculinity. I don't think I'm not saying that toxic masculinity doesn't exist, but the masculinity that I feel that Tate is at least speaking to is beneficial for society in some regards. Um, I was trying to get a grasp of this toxic masculinity because it's not really
So it's a
a
fluid
true,
type of
yeah,
issue, right?
it's not a definition that is like in Oxford or Webster, whatever. But from what I could gather, um, they trying to say it's harmful to society, and that the main thing is about men's dominance and self-reliance and the competitive nature of a man. And I feel like all those things are natural for men, and I think it's healthy for men to indulge in some of those things. Like no woman wants a man that's not self-reliant in some form or fashion. A man that is not self-reliant and that can't fend himself in this world, not that doesn't mean he can't ask for help from other people, but a man that can't even find it in his heart to say I need to be a man and I need to be vulnerable and say, hey, I need help in this situation. That's a man that is self-reliant in his own thinking and saying, hey, I need to get my act together. So
Quick question.
yes.
I think something like self-reliance is coveted on a person-to-person level.
Mm.
So, question to you, as a man, would you covet a woman that is self-reliant or Calvin reliant?
What? Okay, so what do you mean by Calvin reliant? What do you mean?
Just
Like,
on the opposite side of the spectrum of what it means to be self-reliant is to be reliant on others. So, would you, in lieu of being self-reliant, would you covet a woman who is reliant on you fully or largely?
well, I think now this is more so of Andrew's point. I think one of his main points. I think a woman should be self-reliant, but in regards to marriage and partnership, one of his scenarios that he always gives and that I think is reasonable is like if we're on a date or something, or we in public, he says it's my duty, um, you know, as a man to protect her if something were to go wrong. Because think about it, like if something did go wrong and she ends up getting hurt and I got to report that to the mother and father, they're going to look at me. Now, if it's something that she did that was self-inflicted that I had no control over, they're going to be like, okay, she should have done better. She should have been more self-reliant to know better. But if it was something that I could have stopped while we was on that date or adventure or something like that, then that's my full responsibility. So I think the whole self-reliant thing is subjective and to that person, subjective to that person, versus it just being like she has to be totally dependent on me. I think my role as a man that's already imposed on me it's that's just the nature of that. But I mean, for you, do you think a woman should be Chris reliant?
Well, like I said, I think self-reliance is just something that's coveted in all relationships we have. We don't want people to be, or we don't want to exist in codependent relationships at all. So I don't know if any of the things that you listed as quote-unquote masculinity are exclusive to men. I think that's just something that we all want. If you could reiterate what you said earlier,
About what is masculine?
yeah.
Well, I mean, okay. So according to according to the definition from what I could gather about what exactly toxic masculinity is. You know, it talks about the self-reliance, the competitive nature, the dominance. You know, so those are, from what I see, are the main three things, three components that toxic masculinity talks about.
Yeah, and I think those are so loose. So let's get a little dirty here. You know, what do we think of when we think of toxic masculinity? We're thinking of misogynistic views about, well, I'll say traditional views. You know, traditional
Yeah,
views
yeah.
about how things were in the old days. You know, how men used to act, how women used to act. You know, that's what, you know. I think that definition is kind of helpful, but I think, you know, when most people think about toxic masculinity, they have a traditional versus a modern dynamic of what men and women relations look like. Um, so in my eyes, I kind of fall in the modern standpoint of, I don't think everything has to be black and white. I don't think men have to fill a specific role. There's some things that I think can be agreed upon and understood on both parties and can be worked through as a unit, as opposed to, I, a man, have to do this, this, and this, while my woman has to do this, this, and this. I don't know if that's particularly useful, and it very is constraining to me in
I
a
think
relationship.
it brings order to the relationship,
I
if
think it
anything.
can bring structure, but I think when you have expectations that may be out of somebody's wheelhouse and you're putting that on them and they can't provide that, it's just a very tough situation to be
So
in.
so okay, my question. I think this aligns with like, do you? I think it's okay if a woman can make more than a man, like be the breadwinner, whatever.
I think that's fine, yeah.
But the problem is, like you brought up, like providing and things of that nature. I feel like in a relationship standpoint, it is the man's duty to be able to provide, and if all, at least provide to the point where, let's say the woman is blessed to and gifted to have the ability to, I don't know, perform neurosurgeon or something like that, where she's making big time money,
Mhm.
like six figures, and the guy is a, you know, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate what the guy does. I don't want to
Mhm.
offend anybody.
That's okay.
But let's say he makes about
Allegedly, you know.
70 grand, 60,
Hmm.
and the woman's making 200 grand or
Yeah.
something like that. I feel like he should be in a position as a man. It's already imposed on him to be able to, at least, if she quits her job, to be able to keep the family afloat and keep the family in a position of thrivability, you know, to at least do things that they would like to do and keep food on the table, stuff like that, pay the bills, stuff like that.
I think that's useful for some people.
Mhm.
But I think if you're in a dynamic like that, there's probably some mutual understanding about what a breadwinner looks like. If I, the man in that situation, am not the breadwinner,
Mhm.
what I do offer, what I do provide in other ways, I feel like that is perfectly fine. And I feel like a lot of relationships have either a dynamic that's equal or it may be, you know, relatively equal to where there's no distinction in breadwinner versus not breadwinner.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't even know if that, even like in our modern times where pay gaps have, you know, decreased, if something like I'm making twice as much as my wife even exists anymore.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's what I'm speaking to when you have a modern world that we're living in now where there's an attempt at more equality. We're fighting for things like women's issues and, you know, all things of that nature. You know, why bring traditional ideals into this modern world?
Well, I think some of the word traditional is, you know, obviously it reverts back to something that has been just the way. And if you think about it, it's a way for a reason. I think it's a matter of what's most beneficial and efficient for certain things to get done. Because I mean, if it, because you have to think about what else can there be to combat the traditional ways of, you know, what is right for a man to do and what is right for a woman to do. Like until a new form of that arises and it does better,
Well, I think that's
You
the
know,
problem is it's arising and there's pushback from men, I believe, who I'll say don't want to concede the power dynamic within the
so
relationship.
so my question is what is that? What is this? That's my whole thing. Like, what is the next big advancement for just the dynamic of a relationship in a marriage, or just relationship in general between man and woman?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at things with less titles. Obviously, I feel like there's a lot of we're in a big individuality type of society right now, a big independent type of society. I don't know if things like traditional relationships look how they looked 50 years ago in today's society, if they can look like that moving forward. When, you know, I make what I make and I don't need you as a woman, right?
Mm.
I, a man, don't need a woman to cook and clean when I have, oh my goodness, when I have McDonald's on the corner. These traditional things are kind of, we're past them as a society. We've moved past them. So I don't see why the expectation of some of those things still exist, is my point. I feel like the new wave is here,
Mm.
and it's just a matter of us falling into it. But there's a lot of resistance.
I mean, you bring up the point about like so like men and women are, you know, in recent events they have pushed for equality in regards to like pay and stuff like that. So yes, a woman can make just as much, but my whole thing is the what isn't already imposed on a man that will never change. Like yes, a woman can make just as much as a man, but because a woman can become pregnant, her ability will become she'll become crippled, like to like at some point she will not be able to work. She'll have to go on bed rest. She'll have to go under if she had to get a C-section or whatever the case may be. Like she'll have to take time away from work. And the man, you know, when everything's on the line, that's when he's gonna have to be the one to bring everything home.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
You
not
know.
particularly too privy to things like maternity leave, but I know that a lot of companies have adopted policies like that try to accommodate for the modern woman to be able to, make a living and take care of her maternal duties. Same with paternal leave. Like there's, I think, an attempt of a push to have this universal equality. Um, and I think, living in that a little bit more, maybe 20, 30, 50 years down the road, we'll see how, that affects dynamics within relationships. I don't know if the pushback is as strong at that point in time. I feel like most people would have gotten used to that. We're talking about our generation now being fathers and mothers, and what we're imparting on our children growing up in a, kind of independent, individualistic society. I think it looks a lot different than what our mothers and fathers went through, how they learned what relationships are and those dynamics.
Yeah, I think it's still in regards of efficiency, and what's best for the relationship. Yes, a man could have leave, whatever. He could leave work. I don't know what it is, maybe like a month, or I don't know how long it is, but they get some time to be with the family, and that's all well and good. But it's still the it's still there. The precedent of him taking care of that family is still there, and yes, I think to further that point, I think there's a realization of how important it is for a man to be there in the child's life, just to show how heavy his role is in the household. Like the responsibility that man carries, it's not just to be the provider, but to be the protector. I think the realization of, and I think that all boils down to like having, uh, creating a life as a man to, for example, I have a job that allows me to be home, but also pays the bills, and that's something that I already um, thought about. I intentionally thought about, the day I have a child, and I want to be able to be there, but also be in a position to provide.
Mm.
And I think that's why we see a lot of people in their 30s getting married and having children at an older age, especially for women, because I feel like we in a day and age where, to your point, where people feel like things are a little bit more fluid, and I feel like when things become more fluid, it relaxes the urgency that a man needs to move in his life. So therefore, it probably puts more pressure on a woman to feel like she has to get a job to be a self-starter, to be that entrepreneur. And I'm not knocking that at all. I feel like women just need to do that just because that's just something to do in life. But I think it all kind of like cycles together, and like it affects, just that whole dynamic.
Well, I think one thing that's really interesting, I think we need to spend a little bit of time on, is the concept of a provider. And I think when we talk about toxic masculinity, that's kind of the aspect that gets lost in what it means to provide. I think a lot of people think of provision as financial means, making sure a roof is over their head, making sure food's on the table. But I think being a father, being an emotional figure in your child's life, your spouse's life,
There's no need to cry.
Well, I'm saying that I think that's that's lost. I think that's lost in the provision concept, where it's not just I need to be a materialistic giver, but I also need to invest emotionally. So things like paternal leave help to that. Being able to be in the early stages of that child's development, and to support your spouse when they're going through a difficult time on their body, on their mental health. That is part of the provision of what it means to be a man, not just in the financial standpoint, but in the emotional well-being standpoint, in the mental health, the spirituality, whatever it may be. So I don't think that needs to be lost in the conversation of what it means to be a provider. So when we speak of provision, I think the traditional sense is what you're speaking to about house, all that stuff. But I think the modern standpoint, which is what I get behind of what it means to be a modern man, is to be in tune with your emotions, not suppress them, but to communicate those effectively, and to provide that stability, that emotional stability, as well as everything else that you've listed.
Now, I won't say that's more of a modern thing. I think that's a expectation that has always been there for a man to.
So.
Well, okay. I agree with you to a certain point. And you tell me this all the time. Just because it's not defined doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
The precedent of, I feel like, a man being well-rounded, if you will, to be able to provide, financially, spiritually, mentally, relationally, if they have children, or with their significant other. I think that precedent has always been there. It's just a matter of maybe have not been as popular, because like amongst I would say during that time it was probably not cool if a man was just always there for his family or like that, however you want to preface it. But I think that's just always been a thing, to be able to provide in that way. And I would argue to some standpoint that is a traditional concept, to be able to provide, because ultimately everything that man is doing is for his family. Like every single thing, if he puts his family in a position to be poor, from an emotional standpoint, he bears the burden. If he puts his family in a position to be poor from a materialistic standpoint of like financials, that is his burden. That's his fault. Like, and of course you would want the woman to be like, support him to get back on his feet. But at the end of the day, it's on him to get back on his feet to propel the family forward. So I think that's always been a traditional concept, and I think it's more more prevalent due to like just social media and all that type stuff and everybody talking about it. But I think that's just always been, you know, just a thing, a traditional thing.
I think that in what we see generationally passed down, I think there are a lot of, in my view, fathers that did the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And children that learn, especially young men that learn the bare minimum of what to do as a father, and did that to their children, and their children did it to their children. So I understand the sentiment of that's what you're supposed to do, but I don't know if it materialized like that. And I hope now that there's a realization that, we must accommodate on all fronts. And I guess that's just something that remains to be seen. We're in a world that kind of promotes emotional health a lot more than traditionally speaking, especially when it comes to men's issues. So, you hope that those type of things continue to be in the conversation when it comes to fatherhood, manliness, what all that means.
I mean, I guess we could also speak to just the drive, like from, it talks about like competition with toxic masculinity. I think because the world is the way it is, you have to work to actually bring things into this world. And certain, like, for example, like my point earlier is like, if everything was to like just fail, just the society goes wrong and all this type of stuff, like, I hope the man puts his pride away and do whatever needs to be done to provide for his family. Now, that takes some of the things are more physical in a sense, if the world ever came to something like that. But also you got to have like that competitive nature as a man to put yourself. It's more so to not get overrun by the things of the world that feel like overwhelming. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's important for a man to possess, to have in his arsenal. Something that drives him, that ambition to want it, to like, I got to get it. You know what I'm saying? Because if not, everything I worked for this up until this point go away.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when you talk about drive and competitiveness. I feel like black women have had to learn that. I mean, they always had it, but have had to live in that. When you talk about, family structures that may not be nuclear or traditional, black women have had to take the reins. Women in general have had to take the reins and, kind of be the leaders, be the father and the mother of the families, especially speaking to like single family or, absent father household. So, I think that drive is something that has kind of been adapted to what it means to be a woman as well. And when you're speaking to equality, and there's a necessity for us to both have a competitiveness, us to both have a drive, there's definitely room to butt heads if there's no understanding between that, if there's no common ground of what we each offer, what we both do. Like, you would think traditionally that we can't both be breadwinners. Like, that won't work. That seems very unorthodox, traditionally speaking. And I feel like that's the place that we're in now when I'm speaking to the independence, the individuality. We each can exist without the other, which I think traditionally could, was, hit or miss. When we both have that drive, when we both have that competitiveness, who takes the lead? And I think that's not particularly set in stone in today's relationships in today's society. And I don't think it needs to be. I think that's a, independent sort of, case by case, relationship by relationship thing that needs to be discussed between couples and not a societal expectation of men and women.
Okay, so to your point about like the man and the woman both being like breadwinners, I think it'll be wrong of me just to say that communication doesn't exist. I think communication has to be at the forefront in those type of situations. Like if, in today's society where men and women can either make the same amount or women can make even more, in some cases. But I guess from the traditionalist standpoint, of what it's always been or known to be, that, a woman should trust the decisions of the man. You see what I'm saying? Like I wouldn't advise a woman to get with a man that hasn't shown patterns of quote unquote masculinity in some form or fashion. The competitive drive, the willingness to do whatever it takes, the self-reliance, whatever else masculinity wants to describe itself as. I wouldn't advise a woman to get with a man that doesn't possess those qualities, because somebody's going to have to become masculine in a sense. Like it's either she's going to be masculine or are they both masculine, and I feel like that's problematic. But I feel that the woman, for efficiency of the relationship and long-term growth and long-term success of that relationship, I feel that he has to have all those ducks in a row. Financially, spiritually, mentally, whatever else you could think of that would better himself to be better for his wife and potential family. And if he doesn't possess those things, I wouldn't advise a woman to do that, because it'll just be a mess going forward. In my opinion, it'll just be a mess.
I think it's difficult when you think about all those things that you mentioned. Like, to have those ducks in a row is such a hard ask for any gender. We're all broken people. We all come from broken situations, broken families. We've been indoctrinated in, some things that may not be the most healthiest pertaining to relationships and, family relationships, spousal relationships. I think it's a difficult ask, and that's where I lie on the communication and understanding aspect, to where, we don't have to try to, fit our square inside the circle. The little the children's toys that have the shapes, right? You can't fit the square inside the circle slot, even though it's a slot it's cut out, and what's supposed to go there. If I have a square in hand, I can't put my circle. Like, I can't. It won't fit. Well,
to that point, the only thing I'll say to that is the person chose to pick up the circle. I just feel like because we all are intelligent beings, and we see things, or we can at least acknowledge certain perspectives and certain views. I just feel like, I think when you think about wisdom, you think about how it plays out in the end, and you want to look at every situation like that. Like, okay, how can this work in the next, for relationships like the next 30, 40 years of my life, if you think about getting married. But if that's not on your agenda, then I wouldn't expect, you to care or understand. So I don't hold nobody that's not about that life, of marriage or just commitment itself, to abide by those rulings. But if you are, just think about how smooth do you want your relationship to be. Like, if I'm a woman, and just hypothetically,
I'm listening.
if I'm a woman and there's a man that has 6 figures, got his business,
They call that a high value man.
Kevin Samuel's version of high value man. But like he has his home, he has a nice family, he has everything going from no children, not messing around with any woman, stuff like that, and he makes sure he goes out his way to talk to you, make sure you having a good day. He wants to promote your life, your dreams and goals and stuff like that, because he already took took care of his stuff in the beginning, and he has nothing else to prove to anyone. He doesn't have to do anything, and I'm that woman. Yeah, that sounds like an easier life.
I agree. But nothing you said just now to me is inherent to being a man. Like, yes, you should do that as a man, but you should also do that as a person.
Yes.
I believe.
Yes.
So that's my thing. I think the traditional, roles of what men and women should do were helpful when we couldn't do more. Now we can all, we are in a little bit of a better position to do more. So let's change what a man looks like, quote unquote, today.
Well, yes, I agree that everybody should want better for their life. That's what I'm saying. But the urgency for a man is greater. That's all I'm saying from that standpoint. If a person wants to indulge in a lifestyle of relationship, get married or whatnot. But, for a woman, yes, like she should have her ducks in a row too. You see what I'm saying? But from a man's standpoint, he should be able to cultivate that as well.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? That's all I'm saying there. Yeah, and not forsake just her and just she be a housewife. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all.
We're on the same page, it seems. Just some understanding about what we both offer. I can be a man, you can be a woman. We can both exist as people, and we can work together.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, working together is the ultimate goal, with understanding of what comes with each role. Like that's all I'm saying. I think it's unity in community in that itself. Like with the yin and yang, like the white and black, it makes a beautiful piece of art in a sense. Like if there's no contrast, if everything is just the same, like you're the same, then what are you here for?